You got lucky this time, young man. You can hurt yourself in the dark. This really ought to be fixed, and then I must remind Sarah to change the lights at the station. It's been too long already.
Even that sounds better than your singing.
Are you all right?
Splendid!
I recently played through Control and I fell in love. I enjoyed the game so thoroughly, I decided to go through Remedy's back catalog and play some of the older games I didn't pay attention to. I started with Alan Wake. Before I continue, I'm going to warn everyone now that this video in particular is going to spoil the entire game. My goal is to give a story summary for those who are interested, but also might not be as intrigued as playing this game for any number of reasons. Also, this will be a long and fairly thorough. I will stick mainly to the point while editorializing for segments, but I will conclude the video with my opinions after the story summary is complete. If at any point you watch this video and you find you're drawn to the game and you think you might want to play it, stop the video, give it a shot. This game is very digestible. My entire playthrough, including deaths, ended up being around 12 hours if my footage is any indication. The visuals in this game are not high polygon by any modern metric, but the lighting and atmosphere absolutely holds up. Gameplay, TLDR, I think this game is well worth playing still, and I enjoyed it in spite of its flaws, but we can get back to that. Let's start with the story first, because I think that's what might draw a person into this game in particular. Now, I will warn you that this is by far my biggest project I've attempted, so just reading the script, I'm positive that I will struggle to read all this and actually make it sound okay. So I apologize for any errors or awkward screw-ups that I failed to edit out. I'm lazy and bad at editing in the first place. So with that as a preface, let's continue. The game starts with Alan driving down a coastal road and inattentively rounding a foggy corner and hitting a pedestrian. Once out of his car, the man's gone. A beam of light from the sky encourages you to run to the lighthouse. You run into an axe-wielding madman from an unfinished book Alan's been writing. The axe-wielding fiend proceeds to chase you over a bridge, and you find another man proclaiming his name is Stuart. He seems to know you, and he urges you to get into the house. So he's dead. Once inside the house, you get your first taste of Alan Wake's special sauce. Some really funky imagery. The cabin seemingly being assaulted by the dark, and there are TVs all over the room with eyeballs staring at you while a chant of die, die, die. Yeah, that kind of ices the cake.
Follow the light.
The light from the sky appears and gives you some cryptic messages and starts the tutorial section to introduce you to the combat in the game. Enemies are vulnerable to light. You have to shine light upon them until their protection is removed, then finish them with bullets. You will do this a lot in Alan Wake. A lot. Something that's atypical about the way you engage with combat is you have no crosshair or aim down sights. Your flashlight will be the way that you aim, and that definitely takes some getting used to. The combat's serviceable. I still don't believe this is the reason anyone will carry on with this game. I'll reiterate this point later, but I definitely want to advise a controller playthrough of this game because the combat doesn't require pinpoint aim. Again, you're using the flashlight. And Alan moves like an author with a gun and definitely not like a combat veteran. There will be some moments where you'll be moving along a dock or trying to jump something and you will hate yourself if you persist with a keyboard and mouse. That is, however, exactly what I did. It's clear the game was made with a controller in mind, so keep that on your head. And as we continue, you eventually make your way to the lighthouse, and this whole segment is revealed to be a nightmare. You wake up in the car next to your wife, Alice. You're on a ferry nearing the northwestern town of Bright Falls on Cauldron Lake. The ferry ride reveals that Alice and Alan are on vacation, and Alan's a successful writer who's suffering through a serious case of writer's block. You get your first indications that maybe Alan might be kind of a dickhead. He meets a local radio DJ who's a fan, and Alan's kind of dismissive of him. You get a call from his agent Barry, who seems extra hopeful that Al's writer's block will be cured by this excursion. I mean, they're gonna get to experience Deerfest after all, right? Sounds like a treat. Everyone is gonna tell you about Deerfest in this game. Alan visits a local diner to pick up the key to their cabin and meets his second fan in town, Rose.
Wake. Oh, God. I am your biggest fan. I know people say that all the time, but I really am.
I'm glad to hear that.
He, again, is obviously not interested in the adoration she has to offer. They're two old-timer rocker weirdos asking you to put on Coconut number 6 on the jukebox. Stay classy. This is where we meet the peculiar lady friend fascinated with the lights down the hall. Carl Stuckey has the key, but he's in the bathroom. And as we go up to there's a not ominous at all lady in black who shows up to give us the cabin key in his stead. As Alan and Alice take off from the diner to head out to the cabin, Carl runs out from the diner with the keys to her cabin. Wait, what? The key is located dead center on the small island in the middle of the lake. We fire up the generator and get the backstory that Alice is actually afraid of the dark. Yeah, that seems like we chose the right place to vacation. Not spooky at all for someone afraid of the dark. As you make yourself at home, Alice reveals she brought Alan's typewriter here, and she was hoping that this experience could help with his writer's block. Again, we've heard that numerous times by everyone so far. She spoke with a local doctor that works with artists, and Alan loses his goddamn mind. This response is in no way justified, but also is kind of hilarious. He runs out on her, as was the style at the time. In spite of the fact that they're in the middle of goddamn nowhere, he gets right outside the cabin where he immediately regrets his actions, and that's where you hear the generator die and Alice screaming as the darkness envelops her. Alan, of course, again, immediately regretting being a dickhead, runs back. He returns to find out she fell into the water in the back of the house, I guess. He dives in after her. You wake up in a crashed car on the side of the road. How did you get here? How long's it been? You and Alan both have shared confusion. All you know is you see a gas station with its lights on in the distance. You have to make your way through the forest to reach it. This commences the other portion of the gameplay loop for Alan Wake. You find your first manuscript page for a book named Departure. Alan recognizes it as the next book he had planned to write but hadn't started yet. When did he write it? You proceed through the forest, fighting darkness-empowered foes until you run into Carl Stuckey. Something is wrong with this guy. The baddies that you've been fighting in the woods are all darkness-consumed locals. You fight many of them, and you venture into a logging camp with Carl taunting you in the distance the whole time. At the logging camp, you find your first TV with an episode of Night Springs. You'll find TVs during your exploration that feature these episodes of one-off Twilight Zone knockoff content. Like, for example, the first episode is a story of a professor teaching a class on quantum suicide. He created a machine that could protect him from death. Each time he pulls the trigger of the gun, 2 new realities exist. One where the bullet goes off and kills a version of himself, and the other reality where it fails to go off. He refers to this as quantum immortality. When challenged by his students that he may be insane, which, right? He begins to demonstrate his machine. As he continues his tirade, one of his students looks down and picks up the cord. Is this thing supposed to be plugged in? Gaze upon quantum immortality. Yeah, that didn't end well for him. Many of these Night Springs episodes can be found throughout the game, and I really enjoy the attention to detail that Remedy brought into this world to build a very specific atmosphere. Later, you'll find that Alan got his start writing those episodes. So that was his very first writing job, was writing episodes for Night Springs, and he's not very proud of it. Barry, on the other hand, his agent, still seems to be pretty proud of it. With that sidebar concluded, You finish clearing out the logging area, including our poor, unfortunate Carl Stuckey. Hey bud, need a light? As you make it to the gas station, you find more manuscript pages and you're noticing a pattern. All of these pages are glimpses of your future. Whatever Alan wrote is becoming prophecy. We need to find all those manuscript pages to help Alice. I found another Deerfest flyer at the gas station, and I'll tell you what, we better get to experience this at some point because the people at Bright Falls are very excited about it. The episode ends as the sheriff arrives at the gas station. Alan tries to explain his situation to the officer. As he tells her he was in a car accident and his wife fell into the water by their cabin on the lake, the episode ends as she explains there is no cabin on the lake. This is the point where the story structure should be explained. The game is laid out in like a show format. Every 2 or so hour segment starts with a recap of the previous episodes and ends with a great fitting piece of music to close it out. This structure aids with forward momentum. It led me to proceed with the game in the way you would proceed with the show, just one more episode kind of thing. It worked for me, but I could see how someone could be off-put by it as well. You know, to each their own. Episode 2 starts out with a flashback to 3 years prior to our last one, at Alan and Alice's home where the power goes out. Alice is afraid of the dark. Alan reassures Alice that she will be okay and tells a story about how when he was a child, he had persistent night terrors. His mom gave him an old light switch and called it the clicker. When things got really bad, he could flick the light switch and it would drive the evil away. Alan pulls something out of his pocket and tells her that he still has it to this day. And a car drove by. Inopportune.
Yeah, nice story, right?
She laughs and thanks him for cheering up, but his tone leads you to believe that this is not a story concocted by a writer. This is a moment of sincerity from him, but either way, she's comforted.
Thanks for that.
Alan's personality might be flawed, but he does have some sincere love for his wife in spite of outward appearances. Well, time to go back to reality. Alan's at the sheriff's station now, and he does not want to give the cops his true story because no one's going to believe that his wife vanished from his cabin that doesn't exist. He's been shooting darkness-infused locals who disappear upon death, and he's been finding manuscript pages describing the future that he may or may not have written, and when? I don't know when he wrote it. He doesn't know either. I'm pretty understanding of his perspective. I probably wouldn't say anything either. The woman from the diner obsessed with the lights is at the station testing every light in the place and ensuring them that they're in good shape. The woman at the front desk tells us her name is Cynthia Weaver, and she is the town eccentric. Apparently, at one point, she was the editor of the town newspaper until she became obsessed with maintaining all the lights in town and refusing to step on shadows. I got a feeling this is not the last time we'll interact with old Cynthia Weaver. Sarah, the sheriff, is surprisingly understanding of the amnesiac Alan describing a cabin that doesn't seem to exist, and he's begging her to look for his missing wife. I don't know. Small town sheriffs, I guess.
Hello?
During this conversation, he gets a call from a kidnapper claiming to have Alice, asking Alan to meet him at Lover's Peak tonight. He left Alice's driver's license behind the sheriff's station to prove he meant business. Alan's agent calls up Alan and says he's been off the grid for a week now. So it's been a week since we crashed our car. Or we crashed our car a week after the cabin incident. That's like putting things into perspective now. He's in town and he's coming for Al, as he calls him. Now is the time to shake the coppers and save our damn wife. Sarah tells Alan he's not under arrest, so he is free to go, but just as we're about to leave, Dr. Emil Hartman, the man Alice was trying to get Alan to go see, he is in the waiting room. He offers a room to Alan and explains that he was the one who invited Alice to Bright Falls in the first place. Bam! In the face! Yeah, Alan's a bit of a hothead. Barry arrives to defuse the situation. He's the typical New York agent archetype, but as the game progresses, we'll see him in a different light. He continues to prove that he is well and truly Alan's friend. I like Barry. Since the cabin you rented in this town apparently doesn't exist, you need to find a place to go stay, so you head to see Rusty, the officer from the diner in the beginning of the game, to get a room at the lodge on the lake. Al tells Barry to wait in the cabin. He's going to Lover's Peak to meet the kidnapper. If he doesn't return, call in the cavalry. Al treks through the wilderness from the cabin on foot, engaging numerous darkness-imbued foes, and I can't help but wonder why he didn't A, use the car to get there at the very least, or B, traverse this long distance during the day and wait on site. Gameplay though, right? When you finally meet up with the kidnapper, you're inundated with waves of enemies you're forced to fight off together. After dispatching them, he tells Alan he knows exactly how this conversation goes because he's read it all before in his book. He wants the full manuscript along with editorial control for Alice's release. Unfortunately, Alan is once again an inexplicable hothead, and it leaves them being separated. Barry calls Alan and informs him that the cabin is surrounded by birds that have, in his words, gone all Hitchcock on them. We have got to make it through the woods and back to the cabin. Alan goes full GTA and just steals a truck. Oh, is that how it works? If I find a garage key and a key to a vehicle, I could just take that vehicle? Well, apparently that's how it works. Basically this entire game. If you find a vehicle, you could just jump in it. And speaking of vehicles, the vehicle controls are rough in this one. This might be a good time to say it's clear again that this game was designed around controller, and I stubbornly pushed through this whole game with keyboard and mouse. The aim controls are funky, the driving is tragic, and although there are very few moments of actual platforming, those moments are certainly made more difficult with keyboard and mouse. Don't be dumb like me. So anyhow, I continue, and with my Ricky Bobby truck driving, I'm eventually able to make it back to the cabin and deal with baby Barry's aviary concerns. The birds can be burned away with your light, but the flashlight is weak as hell. Feels like you're carving the Grand Canyon by way of pissing on it at times. The game is not hard, but you will likely die a few times. The good news is Barry wholeheartedly believes Alan's crazy story now. Alan feels like he has to finish the manuscript to get Alice back, but it's clear he doesn't have the capacity to do so yet.
Rose?
Meanwhile, Barry gets a call from Rose, who is decidedly less rosy than usual. She found Mr. Wake's pages. She lives in the trailer park outside of town. And this is when you really get another taste for how good the soundtrack is. The end of every episode is so good. Much of this music in this game is not music I would listen to outside of it, but damn, it really adds the atmosphere. And honestly, every time a song starts, you feel like, okay, this is exactly what needed to be playing right now. And I could say now, as after playing recently other games from Remedy, I could say that this is obviously a theme for them. Let's go check out that trailer park.
Oh dear.
So our not-so-dynamic duo head to the trailer park to see Rose. She's less perky than usual when she greets you at the door. She serves some coffee that Barry remarks is very good. Well, apparently it's too good, because the boys get knocked out and the voice from the light warns Alan that the lady in black is the darkness hiding in the skin of Barbara. Upon waking up, Alan sees another TV message from himself. Periodically, there have been brief flashes of Alan on TV monologuing while he's writing the manuscript. This time he reveals that his writing was aided by Barbara, who he refers to as his editor. Before we leave the trailer, we see Barry, who's still very knocked out, and Rose, who has certainly seen better days. Girl's fucked up. The owner of the trailer park seems to have notified the cops about Alan and Barry out of concern for Rose, and they brought a very trigger-happy FBI agent who seems to be very obsessed with Alan. Time to escape the cops. How the hell did we get to this point again? We escaped the cops with the help of the darkness, who was flipping cop cars and taking them over. Our meandering through the woods leads us to the radio station. There are radios placed throughout the game where we get periodic updates on the happenings in town from the night DJ, who we met on the ferry at the beginning of the game. Throughout the game, you don't encounter a lot of townsfolk or engage with a lot of the townies in general, so this kind of keeps you engaged with how the regular folks are dealing with the weird goings-on in Bright Falls. Inside the radio station, the DJ is again friendly with us. He wants to talk Alan into an interview, but our conversation is interrupted by Super Cop, who is once again not able to control his trigger finger. Dude is trying to kill civilians at this point. We once again escape the small town cops, who are clearly not that great at their jobs. After navigating a long segment of extended combat, including fighting haunted junk on a bridge that took an embarrassing amount of time to get past, we get another call from the kidnapper, who wants to meet at the coal mine. So we steal a car, again, and proceed forward. Time skips a bit, and it's daytime, and it reveals something. When your enemy is the darkness itself, you feel no tension during the day. The devs seem to notice this as well, because narratively they give you any excuse to ignore the day for the rest of the game. You make it to the coal mine and wait for a kidnapper, and guess what? He never shows. Finally, he calls once it's already dark. Time to meet him at the lookout point at Mirror Peak now. This truck would have probably been a bit quicker and less tension-filled during the day, right? Yeah. After defeating a bevy of various foes on our way, we finally meet up with our kidnapper, who isn't a kidnapper at all. He was bluffing. He didn't know where Alice was. He has read a portion of our manuscript and simply wanted control over writing its ending. Well, that's going to be a bit hard for him, since the darkness rises up from the lake and attacks us in the form of an actual tornado. Alan is able to pop a flare, which leads to him falling into the lake. Our kidnapper, though, I fear the worst. We awake in the custody of Dr. Emil Hartman, the man who Alice had referred to us with the artist therapy clinic.
I bet you do.
We walk with him as he explains that Alan has some form of post-traumatic stress due to the loss of his wife, who was drowned in the lake. He refers to his recent state as one of his episodes. Pretty meta. According to Hartman, the recent events have been due to an elaborate fantasy constructed by Alan trying to protect him from the uncomfortable truth. Apparently, she's the only one who has died. All the other people who so far have been unfortunate collateral damage have not actually been hurt. This clinic is quite idyllic. It's a lodge overlooking the lake. He tours us around while describing how hopelessly lost Alan is. We see some of the other patients. One of them's painting. It's a picture of Alan.
Oh, hello.
He says the images keep coming to him, and Dr. Hartman is encouraging this endeavor. He's keeping them in his office. Yeah, seems pretty non-supernatural to me. Hartman's probably right. This whole game's probably a game about coping with grief. Maybe. Continuing our tour, we run into the Anderson brothers. Odin and Tor, who are the two old biker dudes at the beginning of the game. In their 70s and 80s, in the 70s and 80s, they had a heavy metal band named Old Gods of Asgard. They changed their names to complete the image. Hartman explains that they're in advanced stages of dementia. We're left alone with them for a moment, and they instruct us to get out of here and find their old farm, where Alan has to find the message for him. And everyone seems very interested in getting Alan back to writing at this clinic, for therapeutic reasons, of course. After some patients lose their cool, we get a moment to do a little sleuthing and take a peek in Hartman's office, where we discover a recorded discussion. It's Alice, and she's concerned that Alan has become violent, and she's concerned for his mental health. The thing is that Alan recognizes this whole conversation. Alan had cut up the audio from her phone calls to him. He also sees a picture with Hartman and our former kidnapper. It's coming together now. Hartman wants editorial control over the manuscript to give himself some power. He's aware of the power that this town and that lake has, and he's trying to use the power of all these assorted artists under his control to his own discretion. We encounter Barry just before our confrontation with Hartman. He admits his whole plan with all the artists, just before the darkness comes to consume the lodge. Alan tells Barry to grab the car. It's time to make our way out of this lodge, just as it's in full haunting mode. Once we deal with all that, Barry shows up with a truck, and based on his driving, he's using keyboard and mouse too. One small thing I noticed is that Barry took the cardboard cutout of Alan with him from the lodge and has it in his back seat. I thought that was a pretty amusing little thing that they did. Barry's a goober, but he's actually just really cool. He thinks Alan is crazy, but he's down to ride with him and go to the Andersons' farm. Totally ride or die, man. Time to go find the old gods of Asgard.
There's a message somewhere.
On our way, a collapse on the hillside not so conveniently separates our two friends. Again alone, Alan proceeds on foot. In another one of our Alan Wake monologue TV moments, he explains how we ended up here. This is also going to be a good time to discuss a very important character we've been slowly learning about as the game has gone on, Thomas Zane. He was a well-known poet who wrote about the creatures in the lake at Bright Falls with the influence of his lover Barbara Jagger, the Lady in Black. Barbara fell into the lake and drowned using the powers of the town. He wrote her back into existence, but when she returned, she was not the same. I don't like that. I don't like the way I read that at all. I wrote it fine, but Barbara fell into the lake and drowned, and using the powers of the town, he wrote her back into existence, but when she returned, she was not the same. Zane has been the voice in the light directing us through the game at key points. The reason the sheriff told us there was no cabin on the lake we stayed at is because this was their cabin. Once he discovered Barbara's dark secret, he wrote them both out of existence, and all his work as well. At least that's my understanding of it. Barbara was Alan's editor as he frantically wrote the new manuscript until he eventually realized her dark identity. In order to try and salvage what he could, he wrote himself into his own horror story. Although he doesn't remember the contents of the manuscript until he starts finding the pages, he's been living those moments as it's happened. Both Wake and Zane wrote themselves into their stories to deal with problems, and to me it seems like a terrible idea from Jump Street, but it also does make this all very intriguing. We're a little past the halfway point at this point in the story, so before I continue, I'd like to reinforce that I enjoyed all this, even if the gameplay segments were a bit uneven, to say the least. If any of this has intrigued you at all, I encourage you to give this a shot. For the rest of you, they're going to continue with me. Let's go to the farm. Barry is already on site, but so are a horde of foes. This is the most cathartic segment of the game. It's also the most video gamey segment. I'll allow it.
God damn.
I'd imagine those who barely remember the story of this game remember stumbling upon the stage at the Andersons' farm while the old gods of Asgard play with fireworks and stage lights as we wreck waves of enemies. They also give you a stockpile of the best weapons of the game, including flashbangs and flare gun ammo. This game is not Resident Evil. Throughout the game, you will rarely really been hurting for ammo at all, but you've never had a full complement like this. The Old Gods of Asgard track is also just a killer backing track to take a dump on a bunch of enemies. Even Barry gets in the mood during this fight. Barry and Alan eventually end up in the house and find the message the old gents wanted us to find. They had an old record with an old track with the message, "Find the Lady of the Light, gone mad with the night. That's how you reach your destiny." This song slaps. I've listened to it several times outside of the game, and it's a bit of an earworm. Barry and Alan find an old cache of moonshine and get sloshed waiting for the morning to come before they go find the Lady of the Light. In Alan's drunken stupor, he reiterates just how much he misses Alice, and you see that deep down, he may have a dickish side, but he does care about his wife, and that redeems a lot of him to me. The moonshine leads Alan to a flashback to the night of Alice's incident at the cabin. After diving into the water to try and catch Alice, he surfaces to the docks. He believes her drowned. Barbara awaits him on the docks, and she was the one who coerced him in the first place into writing the manuscript, and she was the one who told him to write her back into existence. The glimpses of him on the TVs that we've seen were that subsequent week during the writing of the manuscript. He wrote himself into the story once he became aware of her negative influence, and that's why the manuscript never got completed. Our friend Thomas Zane intervened and took the manuscript while taking form of a diver who lives at the bottom of Cauldron Lake. Alan wakes from his dreams to find an unfriendly face with a gun pointed right at him. Barry and Alan have some time to nurse that hangover from the moonshine in a cell at the sheriff's station. Alan now recalls two things. Cynthia Weaver, the lady obsessed with the town's light bulbs, is the lady of the light from the song. And secondly, Agent Nightingale, the crazy FBI agent, has confiscated all the manuscript pages. The sheriff comes in with Nightingale, and he continues to demonstrate his shitty personality. He's a complete lunatic, and Sarah, the sheriff, seems to be quite aware of this. I'm fairly certain the whole story could lose Nightingale and be all the better for it. He has read the manuscript, and now he desires to press charges on Alan for conspiracy to commit murder based on an unfinished novel. Seems airtight.
Get back in the cell, Stephen King. The only way you're leaving this place is over my dead...
Wait a minute. I know.
Oh my God! What do I need to know? What do you
It is explained to Sarah the necessity of getting the lights back on, and she responds by giving away Alan all of his possessions back, including his gun. She's pivoted to the point of understanding far too quickly for any reasonable person to accept. At the very least, I'd imagine if I saw a off-the-rails FBI agent consumed by darkness in front of me, whilst a man with a missing wife seemed to have some sort of migraine, I would at least have some more questions to ask. Anyhow, it's decided that Barry will stay behind, notifying people of importance of the situation by phone, while Alan and Sarah try and get through the town to reach the helicopter at the fire station. This is essentially our only time exploring the town at all in this game, and townfolk interactions, as I said before, are fairly non-existent. Again, I believe this town DJ that we've met before is just there to keep the vibe of the town alive, and that way we can have limited interactions with specific individuals. There is one man, however, living above a doctor's office who sees Alan and Sarah, who kind of acts as like a surrogate for the whole town. He complains about the recent noise and commotion. Hopefully I didn't steal one of his cars. Through the basement of the church and out the other side we run back to Barry, who's now lit up like Christmas. Literally. He has strands of Christmas lights and a headlamp on and is armed to the teeth with flares and assorted weapons. His character has actually turned a corner, and he is starting to thrive in this environment. He's particularly proud of his headlamp.
Against the Bright Falls General Store is now my favorite place in the entire world. See this headlamp? It's like a superpower. I can just look at one of those things and they die. It's my flaming eye of Mordor. I wish I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Hey, I want a headlamp.
Last one.
Bastard.
Fantastic. We made it to the fire station. Engage Gears of War mode. It's horde time. It's our job to defend Sarah while she readies the helicopter. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a stickler for safety, but when the darkness comes for you, just get this bird in the air, lady. It's okay though, because you have giant generator lights with flares, flashbangs, and assorted weapon stock lying everywhere. So I'm able to fairly easily ward off these hordes of enemies. We eventually take off after our Valvoline 50-point inspection, and we're on our way to the power plant to meet up with Cynthia now. But the helicopter can't drop us off directly there, so we have to go down the river? Time to make it through still more enemies. At this point, I should reiterate that the combat isn't bad. It's just that you're doing a lot of it, and there's not a lot of change in flow. The dynamics of the combat never change throughout the whole game. The premise is interesting though, and the game's duration is short, so you just don't really have a lot of time to get truly tired of it. So I just like to say that just because this is the major obstacle to me for the enjoyment of this game. Throughout your game, your flashlight will like occasionally reveal glowing points in the darkness. So it's like people painted something with blacklight fluorescent paint. And there will usually be messages or arrows leading you to particular caches with like weapons and stuff like that. I had always assumed it was Cynthia Weaver, but now that we're at the power plant, that's confirmed. Cynthia tells us what we need to do is get to the well-lit room at the dam that she built. Before we can do that though, which I am desperate to do at this point, she asks that I cut the power to the transformer yard. I do it begrudgingly before we finally make our way to the tunnel to the well-lit room. On our way, she tells us that in her youth, she had a crush on Thomas Zane, and she was jealous. When Barbara had her accident and drowned in the lake, she was initially slightly glad that she was no longer in the way. Then Thomas Zane returned to writing. When he brought Barbara Jagger back, she was not right. Alan is warned there are no free rides like that. Once Thomas wrote himself and everything out of this world, everyone forgot about him. Well, mostly everyone, it would appear. Cynthia was touched by the darkness just like he was. Because of that, she's still able to communicate to him through TVs and other means the way Alan has seen himself throughout the whole game. Alan calls Barry and Sarah in the helicopter when their call is interrupted by a bit of a crash. Time to go the long way to the dam. Cynthia continues on without us down the tunnel. As a player, I just wanted to go see what was in that room, but I also appreciated how clearly Alan cared about his friend. In their first phone call on the ferry on the way in, Barry called himself Alan's friend, and I presumptively assumed that that was like ulterior motives speaking, but like they have been demonstrating the truth of that statement throughout the whole game. We save Sarah and Barry, who are being assaulted at the crash site. This mob is nothing to us at this point, especially with the Eye of Mordor on our side. We ascend the dam together in stride and finally make it to the well-lit room. On the table is a box containing a single manuscript page. I'll let Alan and Thomas explain.
The page was autobiographical, a memory from my childhood. But I didn't write this. It was a page written by Thomas Zane. None of them were supposed to exist anymore.
Alan, 7 years old, would fight sleep to the bitter end. When he did sleep, he soon woke up, screaming, the nightmares fresh in his mind. One evening, his mother, sitting by his bed, offered him an old light switch. She called it the clicker, and flicking the switch would turn on a magical light that would drive the beast away. To imbue the talisman with all possible power, she added that it had been given to her by Alan's father. Alan never knew him, and anything of his took on mythical proportions in his mind. With the clicker firmly in his hand, Alan finally slept like a baby. Now, almost 30 years later, Alan thought of this as he stood on the rim of Cauldron Lake, the clicker in his hand. He took a deep breath and jumped.
My mind swirled. I'd given the clicker to Alice, yet it was here. Zane had written it into existence in a story I had written. I can get to her now. I can finish this.
That's it. Alan now has the clicker and the knowledge that Thomas Zane himself wrote his own backstory, including Alan's childhood nightmares and his mom's gift of the clicker to cure them. We've made it to the final chapter, where we will begin with a flashback. Alan is hungover at his house after a late night party after a talk show appearance. You walk in the living room and can watch the recording of this ridiculous parody of a talk show. Alice comes home and is incredibly understanding of him, and Alan is a complete dick again for no reason. Yeah, he'll do that. He does apologize though, and we return back to present day in the well-lit room. It's time to finish the manuscript. Zane cut corners, and Alan doesn't plan to do so. He tells Sarah and Barry he has to do this alone and flashes his gun at Sarah for no reason. At this point, after all she's done for him, I'd imagine she would have left him do it to go do his thing without having to put a gun to her. He leaves on his own terms though, and he gets outside and to see that it's now light outside. It's daytime. He'd press the clicker. He speculates that he might be responsible for it, but it doesn't matter. He has to get back to the cabin.
I'd stood on the rim of
I'm going to skip the rigmarole of traversing my way there, but you have to assume again that I stole multiple cars on my way. And I need to warn you that there's a segment on the bridge, including this haunted excavator, that can go right to hell. Fuck right off with this part, man. This is the longest continuous segment of combat and traversal in the game, and it is right when you want to get to the end of the story, so it hurt me so deep. When we get to the edge of the lake, we see a giant tornado of darkness flinging objects at us. This is more of a story boss than it is any kind of combat challenge. There's flare gun ammo right next to you, so you have a lantern, which is like the strongest flashlight. A few blasts from the flare gun, spray down some birds flying around with the lantern. The tornado's toast. Alan jumps down the cliff and into the lake. He awakes with Alice next to him in bed. Yeah, that's not spooky at all. The ominous clouds like black smoke outside the apartment seem pretty normal.
Come back to bed.
We dispatch Spooky Alice with a flashlight to reveal our mentor in the diving suit. He instructs us to fill Barbara's heart with light. We see a doppelganger of Alan as well. Thomas tells Alan not to worry, his name is Mr. Scratch, and Alan's friends will meet him once Alan is done. Now Alan knows how to finish the book. Zane had failed because everything has a balance. Zane didn't pay a proper price.
Older than your first work of art. I will find a new face to wear. Someone else to dream me free.
The credits show Alice returning from the depths of the lake and surfacing at the dock. We finally get to experience Deerfest, which has been referenced non-stop throughout the game, and it is bittersweet to only get to see it with such brevity. The camera pans to Rose, who is now carrying a lantern, still appearing darkly touched, with Agent Nightingale reflected behind her. The game ends with a comment.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
Before I begin my analysis of this story, I want to preface with the fact that I am going based on my manuscript information that I discovered during the normal playthrough of the game and the in-game information I could parse personally. Based on the achievements, if you play on the hardest difficulty, there are further manuscript pages you can find. Also, I have a case of the donkey brain, so I might have not understood everything properly anyways. So now that I have officially no credibility with anyone, my thoughts are as follows. Thomas's writings not only set up the genesis of Alan's backstory, he also created Mr. Scratch to take Alan's place in the real world, once he made the sacrifice that must be made to restore Alice to this mortal coil. Rose looking ominous holding the lantern leads me to believe that she was similarly touched by the darkness like Cynthia Weaver, and she will be the new standard bearer in the fight against the darkness. Agent Nightingale looming in the background further reinforces that the darkness has not lost the war, only a battle. He could be fulfilling the role of Barbara in the future. The final line, "It's not a lake, it's an ocean," to me indicates that the darkness was deeper rooted than previously anticipated. This whole town is more than appears at first blush. What was done wasn't enough. Again, I'm not deep, this is just my hypothesis. These kinds of stories are easy to poke holes in. For instance, if Thomas wrote Alan's backstory, including his childhood nightmares and the clicker, then didn't he also write the darkness's return into existence? He already foresaw his own failure and had to write the clicker into being. Couldn't he have just written the world happily ever after, while, like, himself and Barbara are alone take the ultimate sacrifice to save Bright Falls from the darkness? That story still seems bittersweet to me. It still seems like they're paying the price. They also mention several times about balance in the story. Sacrifices have to be made. They've told me this, but I've never actually been shown proof that this is true other than what like, other than Thomas's attempt failed. Then again, even Thomas seemed to already be planning on failing since he wrote Alan into his poem. So, Alan's writing a horror story, so my speculation is it has to be a sound one. He mentions that there has to be an adequate amount of tension and danger in one of his TV interludes. All in all, I can accept all of it, even if it leaves me with some questions. The story in this game did a good job of keeping me interested in the plot. If you have questions about the story, then at the very least, there was something intriguing in the first place that makes you want to engage with it. There were times when the characters themselves might have been uninteresting or kind of cartoonish, but I never stopped wanting to know what was coming around the bend. When it comes to questionable inclusions, I have to bring up Nightingale again. His end might have been satisfying, but every time he returned, I questioned his motivations, and he was just used as a method to push the player to the next thing. Go to the next place. Oh, just have the crazy gun-wielding guy show up again. I don't know, that's the way it felt for me. Also, Alice's character is kind of paper thin. At points, she's dangerously close to basically being nothing more than a MacGuffin that Alan has to retrieve. In the end, though, I think she serves her purpose for motivation, and Alan's actions alone prove the love and adoration he has for her is true. When it comes to portions of the story that had me interested, I have to say that Dr. Hartman using the local artists and abusing their powers, knowing that Bright Falls gives their art power, was an interesting subplot. It also gave you a chance to interact with some of those people in his custody, including the Anderson brothers, who are cool as shit. The radio DJ on the radio set an awesome mood, and in conjunction with the Night Falls episodes on the TV, with the weird Twilight Zone shit, and Alan's TV flashbacks, all that stuff, the tone of the game was really tilted and strange. I really enjoyed it. Cynthia Weaver shows up early in the game and reappears just to remind you how weird she is. And the whole town is totally accepting of her and used to it. It just continues to set a persistent tone of small town strangeness. Again, it should not be understated how much I ended up enjoying Barry's character. He may have started off seeming as a stereotypical self-interested agent, but in the end, he proved to be the truest friend and kind of like a comic relief character, if anything. Lastly, I have to remark upon how every time a piece of music rose up from the background, it was superb. All the tracks in the end of the episodes were perfectly befitting of the moment. The scene at the Andersons' farm is truly a standout moment, and I'm positive, again, the people who played this game a long time ago, who barely remember the plot of this game or the characters in this game, will still remember that moment. So do I recommend this game? Well, who am I talking to? For me, the story and the super weird setting definitely kept me moving forward, and I have a feeling this game will stick to me a lot more than others. I'll think about it more. For people who don't have the patience for older game design, or who require some kind of mechanical stimulation, who are very interested in systems and that kind of stuff, I can imagine this being more of a frustrating experience. This is not the most complex tale ever told, but it's stimulating for me, and it's a real success. What about you? Are you interested? I played the game on Steam, but it could still be purchased on the Xbox platforms as well. If there was even one person who watched or listened to all of this, I appreciate you. I also hope you've played Alan Wake, or you plan on playing it soon. Thanks.
There's an old town road with mystery of Tom the poet and his muse, and a magic lake which gave a life to the words the poet used. Now the muse she was his happiness, and he rhymed about her grace, and told the stories of treasures deep beneath the blackened waves. Till in the stillness of wonder, still in its misty crown, the muse she went down to the lake, and in the waves she drowned. And now to see your love set free,
Emerson.
I'm a real bad dream, mister. You should be afraid of me. Don't want to run into me in the night, that's for sure.
Please, Emerson. Mr. Wake is confused enough as it is.
Yeah, you'd like me to go away so you won't be scared. But you can't just decide what kind of dream you have or when you have it.
Emerson.
Okay. Sorry. Boo.
That's Emerson. We're actually making some progress with him, I'm happy to say. He works on video
Elbow
games.
strike.
It's trash, of course, but it does involve some small creative effort, which makes him receptive to my therapeutic methods.
No kidding.